Welcome back to the series. We have seen how to extract query strings or query parameters in the previous episode. In this episode, we will see how to extract route parameters in the URL in express.js. Since we are building Node.js REST API using the same framework, there are ways to read route parameters. And we're going to see, for those who doesn't know what are route parameters, the route parameters looks like this in the URL. For example, after task slash there is a number. So the number is nothing but a route parameter. You can read those parameters with request.params.id. Obviously, you need to define that route parameter in the URL in the code. And you can even define multiple route parameters as we see in the second URL. So these route parameters are really useful when you are building a RESTful resource. So by looking at that RESTful URL, it is very easy for you to understand what exactly you are fetching. For example, if you look at the second URL, you are actually fetching the address details of address ID 12 from the user ID 123. So by looking at the URL, you understand what are you going to fetching or what are you updating. So let's look at the implementation. We have already implemented route parameters in the previous episodes, but we will look at those again. So we have a defined ID as a route parameter, and we are reading that ID with the request params.id. As you can see in the task history routes, we defined the ID as a route parameter, and we are reading that ID with request params.id. Go to the details. In the details routes as well, it's the same scenario. So I'm going to define another route handler which takes multiple route parameters. So we're not going to add any database here. We just look at the URL, how you form the URL based on the requirement. So for example, the user created a task and the user modified the same task multiple times, and you want to fetch that user details. You want to fetch the user details which created this task and also modified this task. So the one way is create a post. The another way is create a URL where you fetch the task resource and task details by ID, and then you request the user details based on the task ID. And this is just an example. This is not a perfect example, but this is just an example how you define multiple route parameters in express.js. But it's always best practice to limit these route parameters. Do not exceed more than 3 or 2. Otherwise, your URL will get longer and longer. Unnecessarily, you will expose your data in the URL. So it's always good idea to use post if you want to pass more data. So that is how you define route parameters in express.js. And so in express.js, that is how you read route parameters. But in other frameworks, there is another way to read. But always defining the route parameters in the URL remains the same regardless of the framework. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.